In 1798, when the Alter Rebbe was in prison, so the captain of the prison came over to the Alter Rebbe and he asked the Alter Rebbe the following question. He said, "You seem to be a very godly person, and therefore I'd like to ask you the following question. It says in the Torah that after Adam and Eve sinned in the Garden of Eden, so God turns to Adam, to Adam, and it says, 'Ayeka, where are you?' And the question is, asked the non-Jewish captain, doesn't God know everything? And being that God knows everything, why does he say to Adam, 'Ayeka, where are you?' The Alter Rebbe said to him, Rashi, the classic commentator, the logician on the Torah, already answers the question. Rashi says that God did not want to scare Adam, and like a parent who, after his child turns over the milk on the table and then hides under the table, so the parent says to the child, "Where are you?" The parent knows the child is under the table, and the parent wants the child to come out and say, "Daddy, Mommy, I'm sorry, I made a mistake, I spilled the milk." And similarly, God said, "Ayeka, where are you?" God wanted Adam to admit to the sin of eating from the prohibited fruit. This captain obviously was very learned. He knew the entire Tanakh, all 24 books of the prophets, including the commentaries. He says, "Yes, I know already Rashi's interpretation. I'm looking for something a bit deeper." As the story goes, the Alter Rebbe put his head into his holy hands and he meditated for a moment, and then he said to him as follows: "Do you believe that the Torah talks to all humankind?" And the captain said, "Yes." "Do you believe that the Torah talks to all people in all times?" He said, "Yes." If that is the case, the interpretation is as follows. And that is, God turns to Adam. Adam represents every human being. For every human being is called Adam, Adam. Adam le'elyoin, we are created in the image of God. And therefore we're called Adam. And so God turns to Adam, to Adam, to every human being, and he says, "Ayeka, where are you? What have you accomplished in this world?" And this is something that every day we have to ask ourselves, Ayeka, where are we? The soul comes down to the world to make the world a better place. And yet sometimes it gets derailed and we forget what our mission is. And therefore the Torah is talking to every human being in all times, and God is asking them, Ayeka, where are you? From this story we see that the message of the Torah is not only for Jews, but also for non-Jews. For every human being was created in the image of God. And each one of us has the obligation and the mission to make the world a better place. And this because every human being was created in God's image. As we find in Ethics of Our Fathers, chapter 3, Mishnah number 14, Rabbi Akiva says that Chaviv Adam Shenivra B'Tzelem, man is beloved by God because he's created in the image of God. Shenemar B'Tzelem Melikim Asas Adam. As it says, because God created man in his own image. And now that we are created in the image of God, the question is, how do we maintain that image? How do we maintain that holiness? How do we maintain that purity? And therefore the Rambam says, in his 14th book in the Torah, in his last section of laws, the laws of kings, starting from chapter 8 and then 9 and 10, the Rambam says over there that God gave all humankind the 7 Noahide Laws. And the Rambam goes to enumerate. He says, you know, that God gave Adam 6 commandments. Number 1, the prohibition of idolatry. Number 2, the prohibition of blasphemy. Number 3, the prohibition of murder. Number 4, the prohibition of illegitimate sexual acts. Number 5, the prohibition to steal and rob. Number 6, the prohibition or the laws of judges, to establish judges and courts in every city and in every community to uphold the law. And then he goes on to say, and God gave Noach a 7th law. And the 7th law was the law of Avram and Achai, not to eat a live limb of a living animal, but to make sure the animal is first dead, as we will explain in the future classes. And the reason why this was given to Noach, and it was not given to Adam also, is because Adam was not allowed to eat animals. He was a vegetarian. Now, this doesn't mean necessarily a vegetarian is better than a non-vegetarian, but as it's explained in Kabbalah and Chassidus, that being that Noach now saw a new world, his world was to prepare the world for the receiving of the Torah, and therefore they needed greater energy and greater potential to transform the world. God allowed them to eat also red meat. And in truth, in order to transform red meat, one has to be spiritually wealthy. As it says that ignoramus should not eat meat, only a Torah scholar. And similarly, one who is poor should not eat meat, only one who could afford it. Again, implying that one has to be spiritually wealthy and capable of using the energy and transforming the energy of the meat and to elevate it to God. Not every person has that ability. And therefore many great scholars would not eat meat all week long until Shabbos. Shabbos is a holy day, therefore we have the ability to elevate the meat. But not always do we have the ability to elevate the meat on a day-to-day basis. And therefore it demands tremendous preparation. First of all, kosher meat, and the meat has to be salted to remove the blood, and to make a bracha for a Jew, etc., etc. But being that Noach was now given the mitzvah and the prohibition of Avram and Achai not to eat a live limb of a live animal, so therefore we have now 7 laws, and that was given specifically to Noach because of the fact that he was allowed to eat meat. Therefore God gave him these restrictions and these laws. The number 7 is also a very special number. As the Medrash says, Kol Hashvi Chavivin, all 7th or 7 are loved. In the Jewish tradition, that Shabbos, the 7th day, is a holy day, and therefore is beloved by God. And similarly, the 7 Noahide Laws, the number 7 is beloved. And that's why God gave humankind who He loves, as Rabbi Kiva mentioned, the 7 Noahide Laws, so that they bring and maintain this godly image. Now these 7 laws are primarily negative commandments. And even the 7th or the 6th, which deals with judges, which is a positive aspect, as the Ramban explains, also deals with negative laws as well. And that is to enforce the other laws and not to oppress one in business, and not to steal money, and not to have robbery, etc., etc. In addition to these 7, the Gemara says in Chulin that in truth the Noachides accepted upon themselves 30 mitzvahs, 30 laws. And in general, the mitzvah of tzedakah, the mitzvah of charity, clearly applies to Noachides, as we find a verse in the Torah, a biblical verse, how God tells Avraham, I love you, Avraham. Why? Because you have commanded your children and your household to do tzedakah, to do charity and judgment. So we see specifically that God tells Avraham, I love you. Why? Because you have taught your children the mitzvah of tzedakah, to give charity. And at that time the Torah was not yet given. And yet it was a mitzvah that God gave Avraham. And this mitzvah is for all nations of the world. So these are the basic laws that the Rambam says God gave the nations of the world, and that He gave these mitzvahs again on Sinai, and He told Moses to teach these laws to the entire world. And therefore, the Jewish people, who are the children of Moses and the descendants of Moses, have the obligation to teach these Noahide laws. Not only do we fulfill our mitzvahs of the 613, but yet we have the obligation and responsibility to teach the nations of the world these Noahide laws. What's the objective of these Noahide laws, the 7 and the 30, etc., etc.? It's based on a verse in Isaiah. In Isaiah 45, verse number 18, chapter 45, verse number 18, it says over there, God says, I did not create the world for chaos, for destruction, or for emptiness, but rather, rather I created the world that the world should be inhabited. In other words, that people should work to settle the world, to bring peace to the world through justice. And therefore, how do we fulfill this verse in Isaiah? Through the 7 Noahide laws. By following these laws, one is able to bring peace to the world and justice, and one is able to bring the world to settle, which means by having children. And therefore, many of the commentaries explain that having children is also an obligation on the Noahide laws. A BBC journalist once asked the Rebbe, what is your message to the non-Jewish world? And the Rebbe said, and you can see this on video, the Rebbe said that world peace is achievable through observing the 7 Noahide laws. And this is something that we understand logically, that if the world would follow the 7 Noahide laws, not to steal and not to kill, then the world would be at peace. Many times, why is there war? Because you stole my land, you stole my food, so I want it back, and therefore we have war. But if the world would observe these laws of protecting one's property and caring for another person's property and giving charity and feeding the poor and the needy, then there'd be no purpose for war or strife. There's a famous letter, which in my opinion is mind-boggling. In 1986, the Rebbe wrote a letter to the Brigadier General Rabbi Israel Drazen, who was a chaplain in the U.S. Army. And he said to him, your job as a chaplain is not only to teach the Jews the laws of Shabbos and kosher and tefillin, but your job as a chaplain, as a Jewish chaplain, is to inspire also the non-Jews and to teach them the 7 Noahide laws. And then the Rebbe goes on to say something which is very startling, and he says, it's clear and very logical to say that if we would have done our job to teach the world the 7 Noahide laws, there would never have been a Holocaust. Such words are very, very powerful. And every time I think about it, I tremble. And that there would be no Holocaust if we as Jews would have done our job from the times of Moses to teach and to inspire and to make known these 7 Noahide laws to the world. In order to know these 7 Noahide laws, you have to study. As the Talmud says, Gadol Talmud shemevi l'dei ma'aseh. Great is the study of Talmud or Torah, because it brings to action. The more you know, the more you can do. And this is true for Jews, to know their laws. And this is also true for non-Jews. The non-Jews should also learn the 7 Noahide laws. So much so, the Gemara says like this, a very phenomenal statement in the Tractate of Sanhedrin, page 59, side A. The Gemara says like this, Shafilu Nachri, a non-Jew, a non-Jew that is preoccupied in the study of Torah, and we're talking about here primarily the 7 Noahide laws, because a non-Jew is not allowed to learn the laws pertaining to Jews, like Shabbos and things like that, but the laws pertaining to non-Jews, the 7 Noahide laws, if he is preoccupied in the study of these 7 Noahide laws, he is like a Kohen Gadol, like a high priest. And we know that a high priest is considered to be the highest level of holiness in the Jewish people, who go into the Holy of Holies on the holiest day of the year. And as the Rebbe explains, why does the Gemara compare them to a high priest? To show the preciousness and to show the closeness that God has with these Noahides by the fact that they study Torah. And furthermore, the Rebbe points out the fact that the Gemara says that a Nochri, a Noahide or a non-Jew that studies these laws is considered and beloved like a high priest. The Gemara is coming to tell us another thing. And that is that the study of Torah for a non-Jew, like a Jew, lahavdil, is not only as an introduction to know what to do. So therefore, in order to know the 7 Noahide laws, in order to know what the obligation of charity is, and in order to know what it means and how to respect one's parents, and these are laws that non-Jews also have to keep it of aim to respect their father and mother. So one might think, in order to know what to do as an introduction, as a preparation, therefore one has to study these laws. And therefore, says the Rebbe, the fact that the Gemara compares them to a Kohen Gadol, to a high priest, implies that they receive reward for the study of Torah in its own right, in its own merit, besides the fact that they're studying Torah as an introduction to know what to do. So here too we see they have another connection with God. And as it says in Tanya, that how great is the study of Torah, that the study of Torah is a yichud nefla, it's a wondrous unity that a person has with God, because he's connecting his intellect, his highest faculty with God. And furthermore, there's a double unity, because normally when you do a mitzvah, it's like God who embraces you, like a king who's wearing many, many garments embraces his people. However, when you study Torah, there's a double unity. On one hand, the mind embraces this godly knowledge, and number two, the godly knowledge envelops the brain. So therefore, a person who studies Torah has a double unity, a double connection with God. And this is true for anyone who studies the Torah. Why? For they are like Kohen Gadol, they are like a high priest. Afilu Nachri, even one who is a Noahide and studies the Torah, has this wondrous unity. And therefore the Rebbe went on to say that one of the reasons why the Tanya, and primarily Shayicha V'Amunah, which is the gates of unity and faith, was translated into English, is that Noahides can study these chapters. These chapters in Tanya of Shayicha V'Amunah, of the gates of unity and faith, deal with the unity and oneness of God. And even though there are different opinions, whether or not a non-Jew has to believe in the ultimate unity, is a non-Jew allowed to believe in other powers outside of God? There's a machloikis. There's a difference of opinions amongst the scholars between the Ramah and the Rambam, etc., etc. However, even according to the opinions that say that a non-Jew is allowed to believe in other powers outside of God, in other words, God is the prime power, but there's also other additional helpers, and even according to those opinions that say it's permissible, even they agree that it's better that a Noahide should believe in the ultimate unity, which is derived from the study of the gates of unity and faith, as the Alter Rebbe writes in Tanya. And by learning this, as the Rebbe, they learn the classic concept and the teaching of the Baal Shem Tov of L'olam Hashem Dvar Chanisa B'Shamayim. The Baal Shem Tov teaches us, and Alter Rebbe brings it down in Tanya, the very beginning of the gates of unity and faith, that a person believes with complete faith that every moment God creates the world anew. And these same 10 utterances that God used to create the world in the very beginning, these same letters, L'olam Hashem, Dvar Chanitz V'Shamayim, these same words and these same letters are hanging in the heavens and are recreating the world every moment anew ex nihilo. And as the Alter Rebbe goes on to explain in Tanya, that something which is created something from something, like a craftsman or a potter who takes a piece of clay and makes a mug or a vase, can walk away after they make the mug or vase. Why? even though they are the creator of the mug or the vase. But already before they came there, you had the clay. The matter existed. All they did was reshape that matter. However, God creates the matter ex nihilo. When you create something ex nihilo, you have to constantly be present to create it ex nihilo. The way I like to understand it on a very simple level is when you turn on a light switch and you have electricity going into the bulb, you might think when you walk away that it was your act of turning on the light switch that allows now the bulb to go on. But in truth, all you did was you allowed the current to flow to the bulb. In other words, every moment there is wattage, there is current of electricity that creates this power for the bulb to go and bring brightness into the world. And the same is true. God is the electricity of the world. And therefore, every moment He has to give new electricity, or else the world will turn to nothingness. Absolute chaos. And this is what the Alter Rebbe teaches in Shayach V'Amunah. And so when we teach these teachings to the entire world, these Noahides who learn that God creates the world every moment anew, therefore they have total unity, that there's no other power outside of God, then they can understand what King David says in Psalm number 20, and that is that some come with chariots and some come with horses, but we call out in the name of God. And when the nations of the world realize that the Jewish people come with the name of God, then they realize that all of their war and all of their threats are worthless. And this brings peace to the world because they don't want to start up with God's people. And this is something that, as Jews, we have the obligation to teach this to the world. And in truth, this is hinted already in the Rambam. Where does the Rambam place these 7 Noahide laws? He doesn't place it in the very beginning, in book number 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7. He places this in book number 14. And in book number 14, where does he place it? Not in the beginning, when he talks about the laws of the Sanhedrin, etc., etc., but rather at the very end, when he talks about the laws of kings and the laws of the coming of Mashiach. And he talks about this at the very end, at the end of chapter 8, and then 9 and 10. Here he says you should keep these laws, the 7 Noahide laws, and he goes on to explain in detail what these laws are. And then in chapter 11 and 12, he talks about when Mashiach will come, implying that the prerequisite to bring about a world of Mashiach, which is a world of ultimate peace, is by teaching these 7 Noahide laws. Of course, one can ask, if that's the case, why didn't we do this in previous days, in previous times? And the answer is very obvious. Anyone who knows a little bit of history knows that it was very difficult for Jews to vote, let alone for Jews to have an opinion. But Baruch Hashem, today we live in a free country, freedom of speech and freedom of religion, and we have the ability to talk out and to inspire, and people are believing in the Torah. And as the Gemara says, that not only did the Noahides accept 30 laws, but one of the things that they accepted was also to honor the Torah. So therefore today, when a Jew talks in the name of the Torah, this brings tremendous peace to the world. And because we have the right to do this, this means that we have the obligation to do this. At a time when we lived under communism, or a time during World War II, in the Holocaust, when we didn't have too many rights, it was very difficult for us to tell Hitler, Yamach Shemoy v'Zochroya, now you got to follow the 7 Noahide laws. May his name be erased. However, today, Baruch Hashem, that Jews are able to live in a country of freedom, and the most charitable country in the world, here we have the right and the obligation to teach these Noahide laws, and this is another proof that we're about to see the coming of Mashiach. It's important to note that the Rambam, when he talks about these 7 Noahide laws in chapter 8, halacha number 11, he says like this: whoever accepts upon themselves these 7 laws of Noach, these people are called Mechasidei umayis ha'olam, they are called of the pious of the nations of the world. V'yesh loy chelek la'olam haba. They have a place in the world to come. They have a place in paradise, and they have a place in the resurrection of the dead when Mashiach will come. However, the Rambam underscores that this was only true, and this will only be if they follow these laws, not because they think it's rational, not because they think, yeah, it makes sense, it's the right thing to do, but rather because God commanded them to follow these laws. That's why they're doing these laws. And it was introduced to us, to the world, through Moshe Rabbeinu. And that's a very important detail. And that is that the Noahides need to follow these laws not because it's logical and it's a good thing not to kill and not to steal, because if you kill somebody else, they might come back and take revenge on you. Yeah, it is a normal, logical thing and the proper thing to do. But that's not why we do it. We do it because God commanded us to do so. And therefore, by doing so, they become Hasidim. They become Bichasidei Umayis Olam, from the pious of the nations of the world, and God blesses them and God rewards them with all of these great blessings, and the ultimate blessing to have Olam Haba, the world to come, paradise, and to live in the days and in the resurrection of the dead. The Rebbe tells a story that once the Alter Rebbe, either it was on a Shabbos or Yom Kippur, or it could be both, once took off his talis, and he left the synagogue. And he went to help a woman who just gave birth to a baby. Her husband wasn't home. He was probably in the shul. And the Alter Rebbe, spiritually, through divine spirit, sensed that she was in terrible danger. The Alter Rebbe went home and he warmed the house and gave food to the child and nursed them back to their health, and then he came back to the shul on Shabbos. And the Rebbe says that he heard the story from the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, and that for many years Chassidim kept this story under the hat. They were afraid to tell the world that the Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chabad Hasidism, broke Yom Kippur, broke Shabbos to go save a woman who just gave birth. But we know that the Shulchan Aruch says that it's a mitzvah, it's an obligation for a Torah scholar to do this, to save a life. And this is part of keeping the Shabbos and keeping Yom Kippur. But the lesson that the Rebbe points out is as follows: that who can compare their prayers to the prayers of the Alter Rebbe? And who can compare one's prayers to the prayers of Yom Kippur, which Yom Kippur is a day dedicated to prayer? And who can compare their prayers to the prayers of the Alter Rebbe on Yom Kippur in a synagogue, which is a place dedicated to prayer? And as you know, when Alter Rebbe would pray, he would get into a trance. He would say, I don't want your paradise. I don't want your world to come. I just want you alone. The Alter Rebbe reached a very, very high spiritual level when he prayed. Yet Alter Rebbe took off his talis and he went to help another person. Says the Rebbe, from here we learn the same is true with the 7 Noahide laws. One should not say, who am I to go and teach the nations of the world the 7 Noahide laws? I'm very spiritual, I like to pray, I like to daven, I want to study Torah. I have more important things to do. Why should I give up from my spiritual time to go help somebody else who's less fortunate? So the Rebbe says, if the Alter Rebbe on Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year, could do this, to leave the shul and take off his talis and refrain from this high intimacy with God and help a human being, how much more so that we who don't have the same level of intensity and same spirituality and same holiness, how much more so we have to go and inspire the rest of the world. And by doing so, we truly not only prepare ourselves, but we truly prepare the entire world to have a world of peace, a world of happiness, a world of tranquility, and the ultimate blessing, a world where Mashiach will come. And as the Rambam concludes his famous magna opus, that in those days when Mashiach will come, the preoccupation of the entire world, not only Jews, but Kol ha'olam, the entire world, Jew and non-Jew alike, will be ledas Hashem bilvad, will only be to know God. That will be the preoccupation. And therefore we begin today by learning ourselves, and we begin today by inspiring the nations of the world, and by doing so we are sure that this will be the harbinger of the Mashiach, the coming of Mashiach speedily in our days.
Amen.